Hello, this is John Rankin, johnrankin.us. Yes to honest politics. The question here, man and woman in marriage, necessary or outdated? The biblical record in creation is unique. Nothing else in history can come close to it. And there are certain assumptions in place, perhaps one of the major ones, and certainly the major one for the social order, is the assumption that human sexuality is designed for one man, one woman, in one lifetime. And in fact, when Jesus was challenged by some Pharisaical opposition on the matter of divorce, he said it was not so from the beginning. And then he quotes the end of Genesis 1, we are male and female, and the end of Genesis 2, therefore the two shall become one flesh. So uniting both chapters 1 and 2, the grand design of creation and the first covenant in creation, around the unity of marriage and what marriage is supposed to be. In other words, when man and woman give themselves to each other as complements and equals, you build a society rooted in trust, and you have the place that is healthy and loving to raise children. And so that's Genesis 1 and 2, the image of God. In Genesis 3, the ancient serpent, Satan incarnate, comes in, and what is his number one agenda as you read the storyline? It is to divorce the decision-making process between Adam and Eve. Eve is addressed alone to make her decision, and then Adam acts alone in making his decision. Therefore, vertical trust with God is broken, and horizontal trust between man and woman is broken. And out of that flows every brokenness in human history. Because unless we have trust, we have nothing. And anyone who has lived in sexual relations outside of fidelity in marriage knows how distrust grows and grows and grows and has many nasty elements to it. And so this is the assumption of Genesis 1 and 2 in terms of the goodness of marriage, and all of social history shows this. The healthiest societies always, and the most prosperous societies, are those where man and woman in marriage is held with the highest possible esteem. So many of us are broken in that regard, but that's not the point. The point is, what do we aim for, and how can we inculcate in our children's lives to pursue the fidelity of man and woman in marriage? And that's a blessing that was given to me by my parents and my wife by her parents. Fidelity in marriage, and therefore easy for my wife and I to embrace chastity outside of marriage and fidelity within. But I also realize I am, sadly, among more and more of a minority. But I don't want to be a minority. I want that to be a majority for all of us to have the healthiest possible lives. Now, Genesis 1 through 19 is a remarkable storyline, because in Genesis 1 and 2, the goodness of man and woman in marriage. Genesis 3 is the initial brokenness and the promise of healing in the Redeemer. Genesis 4 through 11 shows the outworking of that broken promise. From Cain all the way up to Lamech. Lamech treats women as property as he institutes bigamy. This leads to Noah's age, where you've got kings that are building harems, not only among the wealthy, but among the common people. And this final element of polygamy and building harems was the last straw on the camel's back before the flood came in judgment upon its sinful humanity. After the flood, it just took one of Noah's sons that leads ultimately to Babel, and Babylonian religion that seeks to replace God with human energy and all the broken trust and sexual promiscuity that comes along with that. Then Yahweh reveals himself to Abraham in Genesis 12 to build a remnant people, and the assumption is the fidelity in marriage, which Abram and Sarai at the time, Abraham and Sarah have, and yet with the promise that out of his aged body would come a son to inherit the covenantal promises, Sarah gets impatient. And so she has her Egyptian slave girl, which is a sad commentary right there, or servant girl, sleep with her husband in order to basically have a child through her. This is the first surrogate motherhood that I know of in history. And what does it do? It creates war between the sons and war between the women. The later son Isaac, the heir of the promise, and between the women that leads to Hagar and her son being driven out and treated despicably, and Ishmael, the son of Hagar, it's not his fault whatsoever. And yet the war between the sons of the promise, Isaac, and therefore the Jews, and the Arabs, therefore out of Ishmael, is with us to this day, all because of the brokenness of trust in marriage and among the remnant people, among the Messianic line. It shows how incorrigible human sin is, and yet how patient God is in redeeming us to move us forward to embrace the Messiah on his own terms. And so this is the reality of marriage. Now, interestingly, the Hebrew word for the family unit in Genesis 7:1, referring to Noah's family, by it, when it's translated into the Greek, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, it is oikos or oikonomos. Oikonomos means the rule of the household, and oikonomos is the word where we get economics from. And not only here biblically, but across all human history, it's understood if we want economic well-being, it is the fidelity of marriage in the household based thereupon that will yield it. So if we want to have the well-being of children, we need to have fatherhood, faithfulness, and marriage. Without the father in the home, you have the loss of health, of welfare, of well-being, the loss of relational qualities and being trained, and it leads to poor education, poor diet, and ultimately really tough economics. So man and woman in marriage, necessary or outdated? Ask yourself, do you want all these qualities the biblical marriage promises, or do you want to go outside of that? Just trace the history of any form of social unit that's not based on one man, one woman, one lifetime. You will see pain multiplying upon itself. And so one thing that I've done in my rewriting of Connecticut law and federal law, and this you can find at emancipationparty.us, also linked at johnrankin.us, is I'm seeking to bring into society a healthy foundation. Now, we live in a culture where we have same-sex marriage, we have legal privilege given to those living outside of marriage. In other words, no penalty as it might once have been, and that's a larger issue. I'm always for the inclusive and positive, not so much about punishing that which goes outside. People are free to live as they want to, but we all face and need to face equally the consequences of our own choices. We are free to live in any arrangement we choose so long as we do not injure the life, liberty, or property of another. And the best way to secure that proactively is infidelity within the marriage covenant. And so many people in the same-sex marriage debate who protested not having rights of same-sex marriage, and I was in the middle of that debate. I've met many people on college campuses favoring it, and basically it's broken relationships where they did not have a healthy marriage for their parents, or the father wasn't there, or the father left, violence came in, and so forth, in the absence of a healthy marriage. So as I've rewritten law, my proposal to do so, something to be voted on, debated and voted on, I talk about upfront an explicit and inclusive goal of man and woman in marriage and the presence of fathers in the lives of their children. So if we're going to have a healthy society, we need to live within the fidelity of the covenant of marriage, and we need to advocate for it in the political sphere inclusively and invitingly. Thank you so much. This is John Rankin, johnrankin.us, and God bless.